time you request a new route, you request a new link, you're going to get some server is going to issue a response, and it's going to be in the form of HTML, or you maybe do some fun stuff on the back end. It's going to render something, but the ideal is it's going to hit the server. With an SPA, it's not really the case. With Angular, you can do client-side routing. And there are some benefits, there's some trade-offs to that. The main benefit is that the client usually gets a pretty smooth transition experience. For the most part, unless you're running Internet Explorer 8, in which case, I'm sorry, I apologize in advance. This lesson's not for you. But it's going to provide very, very responsive routing. You're not going to have to wait for that to go off to Portland, Oregon, hit your Amazon web server, and then come all the way back here. It's very, very dynamic, very, very good. Now, the trade-offs with that is, once again, if you have a lower-end machine, maybe you've got a lot of browser windows open, you're only as fast as the client's machine. So there are some trade-offs to that. That's why it's still important to optimize whenever you can. And it's really what's going to set you apart from the average developer, keeping in mind that there may be some people on some lower-end machines. What about mobile? That's pretty important when you're doing server-side rendering, because your JavaScript's still rendering on the phone, and phones aren't as awesome as a 16 gig of RAM MacBook. They have much, much lower performances. And in fact, that's like a big calling card these days, as you hear people say, we want everything mobile. And it's very difficult to do that well and to still get the same kind of level of responsiveness. So SPAs are cool. And for those of you that do server-side rendering, and you've heard of partials and stuff like that, those are not very fun in server-side rendering. Partials in Angular are fantastic. They are great. You use them all the time, and they make your life a lot easier. And especially now that we have components, if you're familiar with directives, components are going to be very similar. The syntax is just easier to understand, and it kind of falls in line with the direction they're going with Angular in general. Angular 2, for instance, actually has the keyword components in it. That's a key part of Angular 2. Angular 1 implemented that in Angular 1.5. So for big, large blobs of template data, instead of having a directive to do that, binding the scope and doing all these fun, crazy, at least syntactically crazy things, the syntax is extremely easy. And we're actually going to get into some cool stuff today. But I want to go over the basics of an Angular app. And I want to kind of drive home a few key points. Anytime, especially with those that are very, very, very new to Angular in general, they're very scared. They're very scared to break it, because Angular, for the most part, doesn't give you like these super great error handling things. It doesn't tell you like, hey, you missed a semicolon on line 4 of file XYZ. It usually spits out something like, F is not a function on Angular line 1726. Sometimes that's a pain, but it's important to go ahead and just work through those problems. Some of the more important things is that Angular is just JavaScript. All right, you can still write vanilla JavaScript inside of Angular. It still does the same things JavaScript does. You still use all the same, key functions that you like to use. Angular has some cool ones that they've got optimized that you can use as well, like Angular.forEach. So the key point there is to go ahead and play with it. Once you get it set up, break it, because where it breaks, for the most part, is going to be consistent across any app. I'm going to mute my laptop real quick. Hang on. So where Angular breaks is going to be consistent across applications. So for instance, if you don't declare Angular and the actual Angular library until after your application, it's going to break everywhere, right? It's going to be trying to call Angular and it doesn't exist yet. It hasn't been called yet. So that's going to be a consistent breakage. Having things concatenated in the correct way, if you don't have it wrapped in a immediately invocable function, we'll go over that in quote unquote proper Angular setup. If you're on the repo, I linked this particular style guide for Angular. Super, super important. You can write it just as any other thing in JavaScript, but just to make it better so you don't have as many conflicts or as many errors, you don't have to kind of be as explicit as you would normally be, there are some general styles and general ways that things should be set up. It just makes it easier to handle, easier to work with, easier to debug, which is a big thing for front-end stuff. If you've come from a language like Java, you get these really, and I'm envious of these guys for the most part. It's getting better, but if you come from Java, you get really great stories about why something didn't work, right? It'll write you a book. Angular and JavaScript, for the most part, not so much. Unless you set them up yourselves, you're going to get some pretty vague error descriptions. That's okay. Take it one step at a time, and just like anything else in JavaScript, you got to break it a few times to get used to where it's kind of fragile at. But once you get the hang of it, Angular is fantastic. You can write really, really robust applications client side that, I mean, PHP guys wish they had. They're still trying to kind of come up to speed with just what we have right here in this one tool. You can set up entire applications with no backend with Angular. You can do all of your routing client side. You can load it all up in a single JavaScript file, do all your calculations all client side, which means, you know, minimum overhead. You know, if you're a startup, things like that, it's really good at leveraging what you already have in place is super important, right? If we all have these awesome laptops, and for the most part, post 2012, 2011, laptops are going to be able to handle JavaScript really, really easily, especially with Google Chrome's V8 engine, right? It's going to be very fast. You're not going to have a lot of issues with that. Now, if you're on a 2005 HP, probably going to have some issues, right? So leveraging that's going to save you money if you're a startup, because you're not going to have to go buy these expensive servers to just constantly do these calculations for minimal tasks like, you know, render a new nav bar or, you know, log in a user, return a new button. Angular is going to be able to let you do that logic on the client side, and you'll get used to that. It's really a lot of fun. It's, you know, I keep smiling up here because Angular is one of those tools that once you kind of learn how to use it, you're like, I don't want to use anything else. Like Angular's great. And then all the React.js guys out there are going to be like, boo. But that's okay, Jack. React is cool too. For those of you who don't know, we're building this right now in Angular, and we're going to go back and build it in React. We're going to build an application in React, that is. So you're going to get kind of both sides of the coin. FreeCodeCamp, if you're on the curriculum, they do AngularJS. So you're going to get that experience here, and then you're going to get it online. But React.js is becoming ever the more popular, so we're going to go ahead and introduce that to you guys as well. Once again, just JavaScript, just HTML, right? When in doubt, you can still use console logs, and you still write, you know, whatever you want, comments in HTML. It works the exact same. You're not going to have any issues with that. So with that being said, don't be hesitant, you know, dig in. Like this application right here that I set up, I kind of made it needlessly complicated for the back end and some of the other stuff, mainly because I didn't want you guys to worry about that. So the setup has been kind of crazy. And if you have issues with the setup, you know, just let me know and we'll kind of work through it. But it's one of those things that whenever you set it up for yourself, you're going to kind of get and even as you develop more and more often, you're going to get kind of a general file tree you always use, a general way you always set up your routes. And there are better and worse ways of setting things up. And there are entire arguments had in coffee shops all around the world about what the best file tree setup is and what the best libraries are and, you know, the best server-side scripts are. You can have those conversations if you want. I choose not to. When in doubt, just build it in whatever you know best and then go from there after the fact. So yeah. Let's go through Angular and let's talk about some of this real quick. I'm gonna go ahead and update this Bower configuration file. So I use Bower in this instance as opposed to just copy and pasting the actual files I wanted into a directory. Majorly just for ease of use. I didn't want people to have to go and like copy and paste and I didn't want to have to upload a 50,000 line AngularJS library into GitHub. But it doesn't matter now. But I forgot to do one step, so everybody was like doing Bower install, and it just doesn't go anywhere because I didn't actually have a configuration file to tell it to go to one specific location. So I'm going to do that real quick. And if you didn't hear me earlier, or if you're on Twitch and you're catching this, I don't think I said it, but I am sick. I apologize in advance. Forgive me. I don't hear too much of a difference from last time I was here. I guess no, not too bad? Okay. Well, at night it's horrible. I lay on my back and I can't breathe. It's atrocious. For those on Twitch land, I'm just doing a git command to get this pushed up here. Cool. So now if you go to the public directory and you actually do power install, it will go somewhere and it will do a thing, which is what we want. Someone, I think it was you, asked me setting up using Express and Angular together. I'm going to go ahead and you may already kind of sneak peek this, but for those of you that don't do server-side yet, don't worry about it. But this right here is the magic sauce, right? So what do? Like I take all routes that I don't have explicitly defined in previously, and I only serve the index.html file that has my Angular scripts. That way, you get super complicated with this. You can actually have Express parse, the URL string query and stuff. Keep it simple, until it comes that point in time. For the most part, do it the simple way first, do it the hard way first, and then go back and optimize. That's just the best way. We were actually having a discussion in the car with my buddy here about doing the tried and proven ways first, and then going back and trying to do crazy, wacky things. Right? It's kind of like learning how to fly a plane for the first time. You're not going to go and be like, planes sound cool. It looks like a car. I'm just going to jump in here and do it. No, you're going to do it the way that's tried and proven first, and then have your fun after the fact. And that's for a lot of things in life, I believe. You don't want to get hurt or do anything crazy. So let's go ahead and pop over here. This is kind of the heart of an Angular application. Angular apps are declared as modules. You can have multiple modules in a file. I kind of stick with one for the most part, and I'll show you why when I get into state routers. You can do multiple, kind of think of this like a parent. This is like the largest scope in an application. This is, what's abstracted from everything else. This is the big, kahuna, so to speak. Everything that you do is going to be linked back to this module. So this is a pretty important part. Now, remember how I told you about immediately invocable functions? This looks weird, right? Like this doesn't look like a standard function or anything like that, right? But we were talking about scopes the other day. Thanks, Jack, for that, by the way. Enclosures. So immediately invocables help protect the information inside of Angular. It allows Angular to talk to itself easier, so you don't have to explicitly state that, and it helps with conflicts. So if you have another library declaring the same variables in the same way, you're not going to get some weird error and have to dig through your console logs to figure out what's going on. So this immediately invocable basically encapsulates this function right here, and this is your Angular application, right? So this is scoped inside of this one file explicitly like this. And that is the kind of preferred way of doing it. Now, you can actually write, and you'll see a lot of people actually just go down here. They'll do something like use strict, right? And I used to do this a long time ago too, until you figure out, until you have that one weird error that throws your game, right? And it'll look like that. So none of this will exist. This will still work. So if you have an application and for whatever reason it's super simple. Let's say you're setting up an Excel spreadsheet for your job where they're just going to plug in, first name, last name, and ID, and you just want to get something quick and dirty and get it going so you don't have to type it by hand and export to Excel. This will work just fine. You don't have to go through and write a bunch of immediately invocable functions and do anything crazy complicated. Just write this all out. Heck, have all the controllers down here. So just go ahead and chain, all your controller files, all your services. Sure, it's not the it's not the best way to do it, but if you're doing something quick and dirty, just go ahead and get it done, right? But in this particular instance, we're going to go ahead and do it, quote unquote, the best way, just to prevent any issues. Now, an Angular module, you're going to get used to a word called injection, or even better, a statement called dependency injection. This is how you introduce external things into your Angular application. Remember what we said about conflicts and things like that? Well, we don't want to have any unintended consequences or conflicts between two libraries that shouldn't know about each other, right? We want jQuery to do its thing. We want Lodash to do its thing. We want to have maybe a slider or something like that. And we only want it to do exactly what we want it to do inside of Angular when we tell it to do that. So we have to inject these external things into our application, right? And I only have one for this app as of right now, and we'll go on and we'll add a few more. The one I have right now is UI router. The out-of-the-box router is just fine. So if you go to another tutorial, something like that, they're going to do like the out-of-box Angular router. It's fine. I prefer the UI router because it's more powerful, it's more flexible. There are a lot of advantages to using this particular router over the tried and true one, so the stock router, so to speak. So this is one I typically prefer. So that's the beginning of our Angular application. This right here. This is you declare this. You now technically have an Angular application. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't load any routes. It doesn't have any controller, no logic. But boom, Angular's been created. Your application's now in the scope of Angular, so to speak. All right, so what's the next thing we should probably look into if we have an Angular application? Probably like, what is a route? What is a route in particular? So if you're not familiar with routes, anything after the slash of your main directory, anything after that slash, those are routes, right? It's basically asking your application for whatever comes after that first, I don't know, I'm sick, so I'm fuzzy-headed. / yeah, we'll go with that. Anything after this, so anything after this part, this is all a route. So John Papa is a route. Angular style guide is another route. So your application has to accept this route and go and find the correct HTML and the correct files and return those things. Well, how do you do that? So this looks infinitely more complicated. So let's take a look at this kind of piecewise. And the people on Twitch, hey, you can always show up. Just saying. We'll put the slides up once again. We'll put the application up, all the changes we make, etc., on GitHub. And if you are on a Slack channel and you have any issues with this, come and let us know. I think everybody here who's on the Slack channel knows that we are super responsive. I live and breathe the Slack channel. That's my thing. It's on my phone. It's on my iPad. It's on my Mac. It's on my work computer. It's on everything that I own. So please, if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask us and we'll get on it. So let's, I'm going to go ahead and kind of comment these out for the moment because I want to just talk about everything else. This doesn't even look like, for the most part, a typical application. This is because I'm following the style guide. So in setting up these, I like to think of a function as kind of a service. It's doing something for me specifically. And I like to set them up that way. I like to make sure that I know that this one function does this one thing. It's general, for the most part, good practice, especially if you're going to repeat it or if you're going to have somebody maintain it. You're going to say, hey, I need to go on the routes. Where are you going to go? Well, if I just have this config up here and then I have this anonymous function, it may not be kind of implicitly stated what the routes are, where they are. So if you're new to this, it'd be difficult. But if I have a function called route, or in this case called router, and I ask you to go and edit a route, it's pretty inherent what function is going to be actually delivering that content, right? So in this particular case, the config is exactly what it seems like it means. It's the configuration for Angular. You can set up a lot of things here. You can set up, pre-application load things. You can set up a timeout if you want. You can inject things from external libraries. Anything that you need to happen, during runtime, during setup time, the config is a good place to do that. And our router goes there as well. You can actually have multiple configs, and that's okay. And I've got some super complicated ones for like Ionic. Ionic is a hybrid application that lets you write Angular for mobile web, and those configs get a little crazy because you do a lot of things with Cordova, and you have to introduce the phone's library system into Angular so you can do the cool phone stuff, right? So these can get pretty complicated, but the key things here are this $inject, right? Once again, injection and dependency injection, right? You're gonna hear those often. And a lot of your beginner problems are probably gonna be wrapped around something stemming from either dependency injection or just general file setup. Right, you're going to have your file setup off. You're going to have the wrong name. something crazy like that, or your dependency injection is not going to be in the right order. All right, so we are injecting state provider, URL, route provider, and location provider, and those all sound super complicated. They're all from the UI router library. So if you want to know what they do, you can pop over here and go to Google, right? What is state provider, right? I mean, it's for the most part, these libraries have pretty good documentation. They have working examples. See, route provider is the default one. He's actually asking what's the difference between a route provider and state provider. Remember, the default out of the box kind of generic router they give you is going to give you a dependency called route provider that you're going to inject into the route to then route the request from your client, right? In this case, we're actually getting a state provider dependency because we're not using the default one. We're using UI router, which is state-based, which is cool because you get down here and you actually see .state, right? And what I really enjoy about UI router, as opposed to the standard router, out of the box router, so to speak, is you can name these states, which makes traversing and using your anchor links infinitely more easy, in my opinion, because it's UI-sref, which stands for state reference. And you can go to different states. You can go to substates. You can go to child states. Lots of states, right? All right, and now we get to the cool portion. This URL parameter right here. So this is just like any other function that takes kind of a configuration. We're naming the state main, right? And then inside of there, and this is all available. If you go to UI Router's GitHub repository and you go to the documentation, all of this is listed out, verbatim, step by step of how to set up these routes, what template URL is, what template is. You can pass straight HTML into it if you want, inside of ticks. You can pass, in my case, I like templates, and you're not going to want to use standard HTML in those, but the templates, this is like the basis of Angular. This is where you start rendering all of this stuff client-side. So template URL, once again, I just mentioned that. I point it to a route that I have set up. I usually, in this case, I set it up on my server side. I call the route views. The route in my server says all views go to this particular folder, and it brings all that stuff and makes it available for the client. Something really important to mention. By default, you have to expose things on your server. And when we do the backend stuff, we'll get into this, but they're not inherently exposed. If you have a backend like Node.js and Express, all the files and folders behind the public scene, those are not exposed to you. You don't just inherently have access to all these folders. You have to explicitly state, you're going to give access on this route to this folder that's named this, right? And whenever I was showing you the backend stuff, that's exactly what I was doing. See right here, every time my server gets a /lib route, no matter where it is, it's going to expose public Bower components, right? And there's my Bower components file. So anytime I have a route, it's called /lib, and you can actually go over here to, so remember /lib is all my setup files basically in Bower. You can go to index.html and looky there, there's all my /libs, right? I had to expose that and give it a URL path to access that information. And that's a pretty important concept. And a lot of times, if you misname it or you set it up in the wrong order, or instead of app.use, you accidentally use app.post, or you put it somewhere it doesn't exist, or the folder doesn't exist, or even worse, you misname the folder. Those are sometimes hard. Maybe your folder is 5 directories deep. Those are pretty common issues, and I can actually show you how to diagnose those if we get that far. It actually happened to me during this project. I went and got it taken care of. So you get used to it, and you just start figuring it out after a point in time. So let's go back here to my routes, and then here we have something called a controller, right? So we have a main, and I kind of want you to, and when you look at the style guide for Angular, there's not a definition. This isn't how you have to do things. This is JavaScript. You can name it whatever you want. No one's gonna gonna fight with you. Well, they'll fight with you, but nobody's going to stop you from doing that, right? It's like when someone says, oh, you can't say that. Well, you can. You probably shouldn't, and it's not a good thing. It may not be right, but you can, right? JavaScript's the same way. These are just standards, and they're meant to help keep things clean, neat, organized, easy to kind of maintain and service. Now, and this sometimes, brings up a whole other conversation, but the word controller means exactly what it means. It is kind of the logic of the view, right? The word controller literally means control. That controller controls that piece of logic, right? It does things in that one particular view that you've explicitly stated. So in this particular case, I'm basically saying that whenever we go to /login, I'm going to give you this piece of HTML. And the file, the JavaScript that controls this piece of HTML is this controller, right? So I'm explicitly stating that. So I don't have a controller I don't want or something I don't want to have control over that particular thing. And this gets important. This becomes more important when we go into binding and we go into actually passing data in between controllers. A lot of times you don't think, 5 steps ahead. You're thinking like just the here and now, something quick and simple. But a lot of times these initial setup things make life a lot easier in the future. If we have 15 of these routes and we actually have what they call children routes, so we have like a big route and we have a smaller route inside of it. So let's say you have a nav bar, you have a main display, like we'll have a left side navigation bar and a top side navigation bar that has 2 completely different displays of information, right? My main controller probably doesn't need to know about the top one. That top bar could change. My main controller just needs to know about what it needs to know about, nothing else. Well, the setup we start doing in the beginning will help us alleviate problems in the future. Otherwise, you're going to wind up rewriting a lot of code and probably making a lot of mistakes. The simpler the code for the most part, the easier it is to maintain. And at least in my world, if it's 5 lines and I have to delete it, I don't normally cry that much. It's only 5 lines of code. But if it's a 200-line controller and I've got to make a bunch of changes, that sucks. That's a lot of time. You spent, 4 hours working on this, getting paid $40 an hour, and here you are, having to redo it all again. And that's not easy to explain to your boss either when he comes and says, hey, why doesn't this work? And why are you telling me it's going to take another, day or so? And you're like, well, I didn't do it the right way, so now I have to go back and do everything again. And that's no fun. But you got paid to do it, so I guess it doesn't hurt that bad until you get fired. All right, so is anybody confused about any of this? Because I'm going to go into some of the other superfluous stuff above that just real quick. It's important for UI router stuff, but not all that. Anybody confused? Sorry, Twitch guys, girls. Anybody confused so far? It's pretty straightforward, right? It's just JavaScript. The words kind of mean what they mean. There's no funny business yet. Awesome. Nobody confused? Cool. All right. This looks weird. This is just what I kind of like to do, and I set it up for this project just because, hey, I'm the controller of this project, all right, guys? I'm sorry, you may think, no, I'm kidding. All I'm saying right here is that if the route doesn't exist, render this route, right? So I don't have like a generic / route. I just have a /login route. So if you go to my application, I don't have that, it would just be blank. And for new people that aren't familiar with that, they'd be like, oh, it's broken, nothing's working. So I threw that in there so that anytime you run the application, it's automatically going to redirect you to /login if the route doesn't exist, right? So coincidentally, if you have an application that does authentication and you want to do routing like that, that is an example of rerouting. So you wouldn't use this in particular. You would use like state.go, and that just means go to this state. So if user's not authenticated, go away, go this way, go log in. You're not supposed to be here. That's an example of rerouting. The location provider, HTML5 mode, super complicated. Looks like Greek. Enabled equals true. All this does, and this is an option on UI router, is this if anybody's ever done an Angular application, the default little URL thing is it puts the little hash. You got the pound sign on all of your routes. So it'll be /pound/ whatever. That gets a little annoying, and you don't see a lot of you don't go to facebook.com and it's like facebook.com /pound/profile.php or whatever it is. It's just, wherever you want to go, .text, right? Well, that's how you get rid of that. That's, yay, no more pound signs. That's like the easiest one line of code that makes everything look pretty that you'll ever write, at least. All right, so the only two things that we really want to look at here is the template and the controller, right? Because those are the only two things that we haven't talked about thus far. I will, real quick though, I want to make this point. So I run concat, and eventually I'll run uglify on this, which minimizes the file space that it takes up. Well, an important portion of this is setting it up correctly to be able to be minified. Well, what this does in particular is this is injecting routes specifically named those things into our function. And notice they're named the same here, right? And they're even in the same order. Technically, this is like any other function. I can name this A, B, C, and D, and then follow it down, but it's hard to read, right? If I have A dot, in this particular A dot states, main URL, etc., or if I have, like this one in particular, it'd be what, C.html5 mode. It's not easy to go and look up documentation at that point. You'd have to go and find the injector and do that. That's okay for a minified file. But if you run a concat on a file and you're doing the kind of traditional injection where you're just throwing these up there and letting Angular do the job, what you're going to do is the minified file is going to go and find that function and minimize those variable names to A, B, C, and D. Well, there's nothing explicitly telling it what A, B, C, D, and E is because that doesn't exist anymore, right? It doesn't know what to fall back to. By naming these in particular, you stay away from those dependency injection errors that you're going to get otherwise. So this is a super easy thing to do. If you do this from the beginning, you're going to minimize those errors tremendously. By default, the length of this array should be the same as the parameters in this array, even if you don't name them the same, which you should. But for the most part, unless you're concatenating, if they're different links, you're probably missing something. Why are you injecting something if your function's not going to accept it, right? That's probably an issue. All right, so let's go ahead and pop over here to controllers, and it's like, all right. Oh man, this looks identical. This looks almost, the syntax is almost exactly the same, right? Instead of .config, we now have .controller. All right, we also named it main CTRL here. We named the file main CTRL, which when you concat, it's not that important, but if you're not concatenating a file and you're bringing these in individually, it's super important. But it's also the same name that we have down here. Now, when you get into more difficult, kind of fun scoping things, you'll start using as. You'll use controller as, whatever it may be. It's important that you kind of follow along with the names of your controllers, right? So you're going to eventually kind of lose track of what you have going on, and that's why kind of having a style guide to lead you and tell you what the correct things to do is pretty important. Now, after the fact, just like learning how to fly a plane or whatever, you want to learn how to do backflips on a plane or something, after the fact, you get fantastic at this and you learn how to do it the right way. You can play around and find your own path, so to speak, find what you like, but these are going to help you prevent from having errors in the future, because you will have errors. Now, in this particular instance, we have a new little dependency injection right here. Oh, real quick, same variable name up here, right? Same variable name, same setup. We are only injecting scope, and scope is a super important word. Jack, thank you once again for making me going off on that 35-minute tangent at the ending of a beginning JS talk, but it's important. It's important. Thanks. No. So the all-important scope, and whenever you get into React and other libraries and stuff, this becomes even better because you start getting stateless, and that's a super important concept that will rock your world, and you'll be like, oh, no Angular anymore. I'm kidding, you'll still love Angular. If you've ever heard of stuff like, think Redux, and you get into like older stuff called Flux, you get into stateless stuff, which is, keeping all this information out of it so that the logic handles all of that, kind of automating these things and keeping these conflicts. And it also improves performance too. Anyways, we're injecting scope into our controller, right? And this is doing exactly what the word means. We're basically taking the scope of the HTML file specifically, and we're binding it to the controller. So whenever I change variables in the scope, I can literally manipulate HTML things inside of that template, right? Because now I have control of it. That scope is now being controlled by the controller. Hey, that's a lot of controls. I'm not doing anything fancy here at all. I'm literally just console logging that it's functional. This is where all of your logic would go. So if you're doing HTTP GET requests, this is where it would go. If you're doing animations, this is where it would go. This is the hub for that template. There's not a lot of ambiguity around this, right? It's pretty straightforward. I guarantee after seeing route and config and module and stuff, it's all starting to kind of make sense. And it should. So who thinks like the template is going to be different from just standard HTML? Is there going to be like crazy JavaScript inside of our templates? Is it going to be like ERB or something? No? Oh man, it's just standard HTML. I even have some script tags at the bottom. So it's just HTML. We're going to move that style today, by the way. I do not like having it inside of my body. It kind of irks me a little bit, so we'll do that here in a little bit. It's just standard HTML, right? There's nothing fancy about this in any way, shape, or form. Now, Angular has some cool attribute keywords that you'll wind up using to do special Angular things like ng-repeat or ng-if, ng-change. They're just attributes on the HTML tag. Nothing to be scared of, nothing to be worried. It's just HTML. Now, you can get crazy and use like a preprocessor. You can use like Jade or something like that, but I use HTML. I know people that use Jade and they think it's faster. I don't even like setting it up. I just use HTML. I'm just as fast as HTML as the next guy I know that uses Jade. And I'm sure there's some guy out there who's really good at Jade who's like, no, you're not. Okay, sounds good. I still get paid to do what I do, and it doesn't bother me, and my HTML is really clean. Dirty, dirty Jade. Now, there isn't a whole lot of craziness here, but you're wondering, like, how does Angular know that where this template goes, right? We have a router, it takes this and renders it. Where does it know to render the template at, right? How does it know where to place this thing that we have? Well, that's actually over here on the index.html, the original file. Right down here, we're going to talk about two things here. We're going to talk about ng-app, and we're going to talk about UI view, right? So first, I'm going to start with the all-important ng-app. I have this problem all the time. I promise you will do it too. You will forget to put ng-app on this page. I promise you it will happen. Everything will be perfect. You will get no errors. Everything will render just fine. And you'll be like, why isn't my page loading? I know there should be, you'll delete things. You'll be like, I broke this on purpose. Give me an error, and it won't do anything. Go back, look at your index.html file, make sure that you've strapped, kind of bootstrapped that module onto the page. It's this line of code right here. That's all it is. That's a solution to a lot of your problems. Now, for those that are more advanced, you'll notice I'm specifically declaring what app is going on right here. ng-app equals app, which is what we named our Angular application or file. Yes, you can have multiple modules and applications. That's whenever you start getting into that infinite complexity type scenario where you can do all kinds of stuff. But for the most part, one app is just fine. And UI router allows us a lot of flexibility, so we can start doing sub routes and sub scopes. So that is really fun and really cool. So there's not a whole lot of reason to use multiple modules unless you're doing a specific application that just needs it. The next part is these new HTML tags. Even if you've been doing HTML since the beginning of HTML and you've never touched Angular, you would have never seen this HTML tag. It's specific to Angular. So what Angular is doing whenever you request this route, it's parsing this file, finding UI-view and interjecting logic onto it, right? It's taking this tag specifically and going and doing things. If you've ever used generic JavaScript to change like an element ID or to grab an element ID and change the inner HTML, very similar, but Angular is kind of it's going through and interpolating the HTML file, figuring out where that is going to be enacted on. It's going to interject all of your logic into that. And there's a whole process, and it's called the digest cycle in Angular. And it's the process in which Angular is going through HTML file and re-rendering things. And I promise you, the more advanced and the further along you get Angular, and even when you go in to do like interview questions and things like that, digest cycle is going to be asked at some point in time. They're going to ask you, what does scope.apply do? What does scope.digest do? Those are all just, in relative terms related to how Angular is going through and recycling the page and refreshing your view. If you've ever been to a static file, nothing changes, right? Your header stays the same. There's no interactivity. There's no ticker. There's nothing like that. Anything that imposes change on the DOM is more than likely done with JavaScript. Otherwise, you're going to get a blink. Your page is going to blink, and you're going to get a new page. Sites pre-2010 or so, before we started getting these really cool, neat templating style things where we're injecting these templates, that's what they used to do. You would have to hit a file and load a brand new HTML page, and your screen would blink white, and then it would bring up the next page. And even for like changes on information, you would get a little blink. And bad websites are probably still out there. And I think for the most part, they're in other countries, but you can still go and find websites that are examples of this, where they'll have like a ticker or a timer, and like the whole page kind of blinks every second because it's going requesting the HTML from the page again. The server is doing all the updating and then sending the page back, and that's not very fluid. It's a bad user experience, and that is all the craze, and for good reason these days, is delivering a good user experience. If you have poor user experience, nobody's going to want to use the application. It defeats the purpose of building it to begin with. So Angular helps solve that problem by using a digest cycle. It tries to, in a very good way, interpolate the information and only digest what it needs to. It tries. In this particular instance, it uses, I believe it uses a shadow DOM, which is a minimized version of HTML. So instead of having any logic in here, it would just be the tags. And it goes through, finds the tags it needs, renders what it needs to do. So if we remove these, right, if we just pop that out, Angular is going to go through this application and tell you everything is good to go, but it's not going to interject the template anywhere, right? It doesn't know where to put the template. So that's why that tag specifically is important. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and fire up the application real quick and take a look. All right. That's that URL otherwise, right? Remember how I was telling you that if we remove that, it would just deliver a white screen. So I just have it automatically kicking out, and it's rendering that login template. Now, I want to go through here real quick, and I'm going to point this part out right here, right? So this is that whole part about Angular finding where the information is going to go. So Angular went through and interpreted that UI-view, went and grabbed the template, and then put it inside of these tags, right? So all of the information we have in that template is now interjected here. Now you can actually have sub-templates. You can have a template inside of a template. You can have multiple templates on one page. Lots of really complicated things, but this is kind of the simplest example of that. Now I want to, and these are all my little console logs, so when you're initially setting it up, you want to make sure things are running correctly. This is what I do. I just sprinkle a little console log in there, and it tells me, hey, we're inside of this file, it's firing correctly, it's doing what it needs to do. I'm glad I kept this PG-13 because sometimes I get angry and I'm like, just work. But for this part, it wasn't that bad. All right, and we have this whole ng scope, we have ng app, so it's bootstrapped, right? So I'm gonna go back here and let's do something different real quick. I'm gonna go to my route and I'm gonna take this off, right? And we're just going to go back. It's still got the same, or reconcat it. So I need to fix that, because that's laziness on my part. All right, cool. So I'm in my main route, right? But because I removed that, it's not rendering a template. It's not going to /login anymore. So there's no template being rendered. All we have is this UI-view, right? There's nothing inside of it. That's it. It's empty, right? And notice that my main controller file is not being loaded, right? That template doesn't exist yet. So what it's controlling is not yet there. It's not present. So it's not going to be rendering, right? All right, so there we go. So it parsed my route. It said, hey, he went to this route. It found the state in the URL, and it rendered the template. That's awesome stuff. That's awesome sauce. All right. Anybody confused by this so far? Does that make sense? Oh, you guys are great. I think half of you are just being nice right now, and like I'm gonna go back to my Slack channel, and it's gonna be like, what's Angular? I'm like, okay, well, that's cool. You know, we'll come meet me on a Thursday or something. We'll meet up Thursday night and we'll talk about it. You know, it's really important to just use it. You know, like anything else, you can build a lot of crazy stuff. I've built one-off tools with Angular. It's fast. You know, if you're in any other language and you want to prop up information like this, you're going to have to use a server. That just takes time. If I erased the entire server and all I did was have my Angular files, my index.html file, and everything like that, and I open an index.html file, all my logic is still going to run. Now, I'm not going to make calls to my server because it doesn't exist, but I can still make HTTP GET requests. I can still do all of that locally with no server. You can't do that with PHP, right? You can't do that with C#. You can't do it with Java. You have to have a backend, right? That's why Angular is so cool that way. You're kind of abstracting yourself away from that whole server-side, you know, ideology. And it's also really cool, once again, for that partial templating. If any of you do any kind of dev work whatsoever, and you're familiar with the dry principle, we have something called directives in Angular. And components basically allows you to reuse HTML. It allows you to reuse HTML and have its own controller with its own information, its own logic associated with it. You can't do that in server-side rendering. It would be a pain, right? That technology just doesn't work that way. With server-side stuff, you can, and the user experience is borderline flawless. And then you start getting the speed things. Quick tangent real quick. You start getting addicted to speed. Like, not the literal drug, but the figurative drug. Well, it depends on if you mean caffeine, because no comment. You know, 6 energy drinks a day up here. But you get addicted to speed, and you're like, I just want everything to be as fast as possible, faster than the human eye can comprehend. And you start going through and digging up library after library, and I did this last week. And everybody has their own, you know, way of making things. And there's Inferno.js, and React is really fast, and then they have Preact, and then they have Angular and React, and then they have Angular 2, and you see all these speed profiles. And then somebody sent me a really funny website, and I won't say it out loud. I'll put it on a Slack channel, but it was just static HTML, right? All it was one page with a bunch of header tags and p tags, no styles, no nothing. It was just static HTML. And the general gist of it is, like, HTML is inherently fast. It's all the crazy stuff you want to do after that makes it slow, right? So that was an interesting concept that eventually kind of got a battle with these ideologies and these thought processes of you know reward versus consequence, so to speak. I don't know. I still like speed. It's great. Cool. So any questions so far before we start getting into like digging through docs and doing something cool? I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to put on Angular material design so we can talk about what that looks like. And we're going to go through like how I actually go about installing it. It's all, hey, I'm going to say this, you know, for those guys on Twitch land, this is a big part of, you know, I'm going to do other things on my own and kind of the side outside of FCC OKC, but those are already kind of pre-planned. I'm not going to have any errors. I want to do these live streams where I'm making mistakes so that you guys can see I make the mistakes to just keep working through it, and how I go about solving those mistakes. So I don't have Angular material design anywhere. Anybody see Angular material design here? Check my node modules real quick. No Angular material design, right? So I'm not cheating, I promise. All right. So we started kind of doing mock-ups for those that have been with us from the beginning. We started doing some mock-ups, and I'll actually let me pull up one real quick. So we started with some general mock-ups, just giving us an idea of what everything looked like with no styles, wireframing, so to speak. A really important concept whenever you're planning on an application. Mock-ups are going to help you it's really going to keep you from making bad decisions in the future. You already know what it's going to look like, and even if you have super, sophisticated mock-up tools like Sketch, or in my case, I use Adobe XD, just the entire process of setting it up is going to alleviate problems in the future. I mean, we set up this login page. I think I did the HTML in probably maybe 15 or 20 minutes. And for the most part, I could get it working as of right now with no styles. And styles would come later, and of course I would fiddle with that as much as possible. We all kind of voted in the beginning to use material design. It was a tough split. Bootstrap lost. Doesn't surprise me. But Google kind of has it made. I don't think anybody really complains about what Google looks like. They do a really good job. Google Mail, I think, is I don't know. AOL Mail may still have the monopoly, but Google Mail is used tremendously in Google Drive, and you know what to expect from Google. Looks great. So we're going to actually import material design real quick. Anybody opposed? Anybody want me to go back and touch on anything before I start speeding off into Neverland? Because we're about to get it. No? Nobody's opposed? All right, let's do it. Let's hit the button. Let's do it. All right. All right, let's pop in here. Angular material design. For those that aren't familiar, Google material design, Angular material design is just all the Google material design, but for Angular, using Angular tags. Right, there we go. It's my first time. Sure, let's get started. See, look, they're using all this cool stuff. That isn't helping me, and I'm lazy. All right, let's go to install. To install Angular material design. There we go. GitHub never lies. Okay, there we go. No, that's for building it. There we go. Okay, cool. I like that command. That command does everything for me. Awesome. So the only thing it doesn't put here is --save, right? So it's like, here, we'll let you install it. It won't tell you that's a dependency. Right, so let's pop over here in the command line. Let's kill my server. Let's make sure I'm in the public directory, right? We don't have any Bower configuration files right here. We have them all in public. Right, okay, now I'm where I need to be. I'll pause for a second for those that are typing this verbatim. Uh-oh. Okay. Somebody's like, my computer's on fire. Cool. Let's make sure this installs correctly. This is going to be your, every Thursday and Friday nights for you guys. When you guys get started, you're going to install your libraries. And eventually you're going to get lazy and you're going to install shell scripts that just do everything for you. Those are cool. You were the one that wrote the shell script, right? Shell scripts are great. Yeah. If you write shell scripts, you can write Docker files, and then you're golden. You're on fire. All right, so mine's done downloading. Cool. Let's pop over here. Let's make sure Bower components. Oh, it installed all of these libraries for me. That's cool. Let's go ahead and index. All right, here's a key concept. I've only ever had this be an issue one time. But I like to declare everything that is dependent upon Angular to work. So usually if it has a prefix that says Angular on it or ng, I put it after Angular, right? Now, everything after Angular for the most part doesn't matter. But as far as dependencies, that's just a habit I got into. A long time ago, I had an issue where I declared AngularJS, and then I had my grunt file, of course, interjecting a script above it, and it wouldn't work. So this is just by habit. So I need to load all of these script files, into my index.html page, right? So I have them here, but I don't have them all here, right? Let's go ahead and make some space. Uh-oh, I almost did what I just told you not to do. All right, let's make some space here. And we'll go through and we'll make sure we have them all. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So it installed more than just Angular Material, right? Because it has other dependencies. Angular Material depends on Angular Aria, Angular Animate, Angular Messages. It has a list of dependencies, and it automatically installs those. Bower does. So we have to interject all of those into our application. Otherwise, Angular Material Design is not going to work correctly. And it does a lot of really cool things. Like if you ever have those toast messages, there's Angular Toast. All the cool things that you see on almost every other website that you're like, this is a good website. This is going to be that. So /lib, because that's where I mounted Bower components, right? And all right, let's do this. We'll do Angular Animate first, right? So /lib /Angular Animate, right? Because that's the folder. And then, oh, did I? Thank you for keeping me from making that mistake. All right, and then we're going to use, whenever you're doing just regular development, I implore you, don't use the min file, because JavaScript inherently doesn't have the best debugging and error logging in general. If you use the min file, it'll be even worse. Go ahead and use the standard file, the large file, until you're deploying somewhere for production. Then you're going to want to use a min file to, for speed purposes. You're minimizing the file that it has to download. So Angular Animate, and then Angular Animate.js, right? So that one's done. That's now good to go. And this is now implied. I don't even have to have that anymore, right? All right, one down. Let's do these others real quick. See, I literally didn't set these up on purpose. Not animate. We'll do Aria, right? Let's pop this open real quick. Angular Aria, and then Angular-Aria.js. Do not take that for granted, by the way. Do not just start assuming yeah, they all do the same standards. They don't. Sometimes I'll have a source folder, a distribution folder, a lib folder, and it'll throw everything off, and you wonder why. So that's why I'm literally opening the file and looking right where it is and going to that directory and that file specifically. Right. Right. Yes. So. Correct. Yeah. The min files. I've never seen a min file that had a different name than the standard file. It's always .min.js. Yes. And that's a good question, and I'll show you why. Because if they're running a JavaScript task runner, I'll show you this file real quick. For those of you that are like, no, don't stop. I'm sorry. This is a little side. My grunt file right here. So there it is. Okay. This is why right here. So my concat file, I'm taking the package name from my package.json file, which is Angular chat app, and I'm interjecting it here as the file name .js. When I uglify it or minify it, I'll put .min.js, so it'll be the same name. And if they don't, once again, go find them and take them out at the knees in the parking lot. I'm not condoning violence, Twitchland. Seriously. Yeah. Yeah, they deserve it. They're horrible people. We got into an argument about pineapples on pizza. No comment. No comment. All right, so Aria's done. All right, cool. Right. Let's pop up here. There's Aria's done. Now, I want to wait for material design real quick. I'm going to do messages. Messages, looks good. Angular messages, -js, okay. I'll show you one that has like a dist file, because those ones will throw you off. All right, that looks good. And last but not least, we'll do the Angular material file. And Angular material will actually have the CSS as well. We want to make sure that we import the CSS from the lib file as well. Otherwise, we won't have any styles. We'll have all these awesome HTML tags and layouts and Angular tags, but we won't have any styles on them. All right, Angular Aria looks good. Material, right? All right, let's do it. Material.js. Boom. Don't open it. All right, material.js, right? And right now, we're going to go up here. Who knows about style sheets and the hierarchy at which you place them on the page, right? Same thing with like classes. You can override classes. You can override style sheets if you don't do them correctly. Well, I don't want Angular material overriding all of my styles no matter what. I want to override Angular materials with my styles. So I'm going to apply Angular material first and then the style sheet second for app, right? And for those of you that say I don't use hotkeys, that's the only thing I use is the autocomplete, and I don't have any special ones on there. I really just don't like hotkeys. It's not my thing. All right, so the CSS file is here. Lib, Angular material CSS. See, normally, if you were not using like Bower or something, you would have to copy this file and move it to your CSS folder and then reference it that way. I mean, I could do that, but Bower just makes it easier. All right, Angular-material, right? Angular-material.css. Is that right? Angular material, material CSS. All right, looks good. Anything else I need? Doesn't look like it. All right, let's make sure it loads real quick, right? I want to make sure everything is still where it's supposed to be. And then I'll show you one that does something different. So I didn't change anything, because I'm not using any of the specified classes or anything, but I want to make sure I'm not getting any errors here. Everything looks good there. Here's a little trick. You're going to use this, you're going to abuse this. This little network tab here, and this is Firefox. Chrome has one, and no, you shouldn't be using Internet Explorer, but I'm sure it has one too. This network tab tells you all the requests that your file made to the server. So whenever this loaded, it called all of these things, right? And it even gives you like how long it took, and the delay, etc. So you're like, I want to know if it actually loaded the CSS file, like Angular material, right? Is it going to the right directory? If you rename something bad and you go here, you go to response, and it actually tells you what it pulled. And that looks like a CSS file, and it says Angular material design at the top. Okay, it pulled the right file. If I rename that, so, excuse me, sorry, Twitch land. If I like, right, and then I go through and I reload, and it's going to open a new one. Just reload. Cool. If I go here, materials, see, if I go to response, this is no longer a CSS file, right? It returned my default route for whenever there's like a 404 error. So this is, in this case, it's just the index file. I haven't set up a 404 yet. But see, so you start getting into things like, did it even load my file? Did I even type it in correctly? Going to the network tab, you can see exactly what was requested specifically. All right, so let's go back here. And you can even re-request those as well. So there's like a set here in headers, so edit and resend. So if you just want to play with that in Google Chrome and not have to go back and change it over and over again and reload your server, you can edit it right in Google Chrome and make that request and send it back. That's sometimes important whenever you're using like APIs and you're like, I don't know if that API has an S or not. Instead of just going to Google, typing the API, going to look and stuff, you just put an S there, re-request it. It will either return a 404 or a 500 error or something like that, or 200 or 300. Right? And same thing with cookies. It'll tell you, oh, these are the cookies you got too. Learn to use your development tools, by the way. The developer tools, those are your friend. They make your life a lot easier. All right, it even tells me right here, it gives me an error, right? It says stylesheet.css was not loaded because its MIME type is not text CSS. It's saying, hey, we were expecting CSS and instead you gave us something else. You gave us HTML. Like we saw an HTML tag. What the heck? It'll tell you that sometimes. Other times it won't. All right, so I got it renamed here. I think I should just be able to refresh it and it'll pull. Yeah, there we go. Cool. Cool beans. All right, so yeah. All right, so that's all good to go. That's all loaded. See, that wasn't so hard. We didn't get any errors, nothing crazy. We have it loaded. I don't know if it works, so. All right, let's try to use an example here. Let's pop in here. Close that. I want to go to the GitHub again. Yeah. There we go. All right, cool. Let's dig through here. Once again, we're just kind of surfing through the docs. We're like, hey, you know, we want to play with material design, and like I was saying previously, find something that works first, then play around with it. So we're gonna find something that, you know, just does whatever we want it to do, and we're gonna play with that real quick because we know it's gonna work. It should work. Okay, cool. So we're not using CDNs. CDNs are just another request. All right, and boom, here we go. Once you add all the files, you have to add it as a dependency, right? So I can't play with the cool Angular stuff Material Design already has unless I implicitly tell our application to use it. It doesn't know about it. So pop in here and copy. This is the app, right? It's injecting into the app. So I'm gonna go here and close all these things, right? All right, let's go to our app.js file, right? Single quotes. All right, so now let's run it. Let's make sure. I want to fix that because that's annoying me. I don't like restarting my server all the time. All right, still loads. That's always good. Okay, no errors. All right, cool. If you don't declare that and you start using it, it'll throw an error. Like, hey, that doesn't exist in our scope. It doesn't exist in Angular in our application. All right, cool. So we just introduced a third-party library into our system, right? Ooh, scary. That's literally the process for almost every library you're going to find, right? You're going to get the files, and you're going to inject them as a dependency. Now let's figure out how to use this. Oh, demos. Sweet. What sounds like a cool one? Anybody got any suggestions? We'll pick a random cool one. Nobody be like, oh, we want the d3.js cool graph with like a spinning circle and stuff. Huh? No. This guy's like, that's what I came here for. I don't know. Okay. That's cool. Ah, that's cool. All right, let's do, I think card's the simplest one. If you're familiar with Google in any way, shape, or form, this is like this is their thing. They're big about cards. Your Androids use them. It's very spatially aware. So there's lots of great white space. It uses shadows to implicitly apply, you know, kind of that coming off of your screen feel that you're used to nowadays. When you click on a button, the shades go inverted so it's over the button to look like it's being pressed. All those cool little art things. This is going to do it for us. They've already done it for us. They're showing these demos. I can go up here and click this little sign right here because Angular's awesome, and it will show me the code. Right? This is already implicitly, they defined this right here because they're not using like UI router, they're just implicitly saying, hey, this is our controller, right? There's also, if you go over here to JS, it'll tell you the controller. But I just want to go here. So this is like the default setup, right? All the stuff. Yeah, that's a lot. So let's find one. Card image large, card with image large. All right, sorry, Twitchland. Once again, hey, show up. You'd have a voice. I could hear you, and like we could talk back and forth. Come on, guys. Oh, it's Super Bowl Sunday, so if you guys are like super into sports ball, I'm sorry. Not my thing. Card with image large, right? All right, so let's see. There's the title, and there's the card, and here's a flex box. So where's the MD? Where's the end of my card? Right there, right? That's the end of that one card. I'm gonna go through here and just copy. And let's go to login. Just real quick. Sure, looks good. Right. And I'm just closing off that tag after one. So I'm just like, instead of giving me all of those cards you had on your awesome example, I just want the one, right? I'm not going to show ours real quick. I just want to see, what we have, from English. I want to make sure it works, right? I just want to make sure it works. Boom, like magic. Almost like they did all the work for us. Sweet. So all of our design decisions have been made for us. All right. Yeah, it's hard to do that in Bootstrap. All right, now let's go back and kind of analyze what I just copy and pasted, but I do want to emphasize literally what I do, right? You take something that works, and then you play with it. All right. Ooh, these even hover. I don't have any actions for them, though. Look at that. That's cool. Little animations. Even look. Anybody else just go to CodePen and like do any of the FreeCodeCamp stuff, and you're like, I wish I could make it look good. They did it for you, right? My UI guy is shaking his head right now. He's like, that's bad, Daniel. Don't tell him to do that. You're put me out of a job. All right. Has anybody ever seen MD card title dash media in an HTML tag before? No, not a standard tag, right? That goes back to the whole Angular thing, right? So they have a bunch of directives set up, and we'll talk about those a little bit more explicitly. But they have those set up to every time they see those particular cards, it is going to evaluate them and interject all the styling and decisions that they have decided was necessary, right? It's going to automatically assume, it's going to say, hey, MD card, this is the piece of HTML that we're going to interject. These are the things we're going to put inside of it. These are the styles that will be applied. It'll do those things automatically. We do not have to make that decision. Now, these are kind of like custom tags, right? You can make up your own tags in HTML, but they're not going to mean anything. Unless you're in XML, but don't use XML. But div you're familiar with. You're familiar with div, right? Right? Let's see what it looks like in HTML over here. Like we're kind of like that's kind of interesting. Like, what is this gonna be, right? That's cool. So these don't mean anything in standard HTML, but whenever you're using Angular, it's applying all these styles to these specific tags. That's pretty neat. And you can do this. You can create the exact same things. In fact, you could even go one step further. You can create a what they call, in this particular instance, I would call it a component. For those that aren't using 1.5 out in Twitchverse or even in here, if you're used to Angular, you should be using components. You can create a component that instead of like having to type everything else right here, you would make this a template, right? You'd put this in another file, and you would call it MD or ng-material-whatever, or whatever you wanted to name it. And then now your Angular file interpolates that, and it goes and finds the MD card stuff and puts that in there, which gets interpolated, right? That's even better. That's a lot of cool steps, and it keeps you once again from having to repeat yourself. If you have 1,000 cards on a page, and you have to go and copy and paste this 1,000 times, that will suck. I do not envy you, right? Now, And once again, this is bound to our controller still. Our controller still handles the information inside of here. I'm going to go through here and show you some cool stuff. So these can be done with components, and we probably won't have time to go over components today. They almost kind of, directives and components almost deserve, more respect than 30 minutes can give them, because they're super powerful, and the way they interact with the DOM, the document object model, is very important, and you got to get used to it. But I'll go ahead and talk to you about what these are. So MD content would be a component, right? It is, think of components like the large scale tags, the HTML tags that you want to be, acting upon in the DOM. And I'm going to say DOM a lot, by the way, because that's like the default. Anybody not familiar with the term DOM? D-O-M? No? Okay, cool. So we're keeping this PG-13. Cool. DOM stands for Document Object Model, and that's just your nodes in your HTML file, in your HTML file, right? So this is a DOM. You hear terms like, if you're in an interview called like traversing the DOM, this is what they're talking about, right? The whole file itself, all these are considered nodes, and you're manipulating those. So a component, an Angular component, which guess what the syntax is for that? Instead of .controller, it's .component. Takes the exact same syntax. A component would be a large-scale piece of HTML code that's going to be interpolated, right? Now, this is different, right? This doesn't happen very often in HTML5. Normally, the one that you see the most is something like that. That's required. And that's like the worst form of security you could ever use, but hey, it gives you some cool CSS stuff you can do. These are just attributes, right? These are attributes of that DOM node. Now, these would be done with directives. Directive is very similar to a component, and you can even create the large-scale, full-size nodes in the DOM with directives, but the syntax is a little bit trickier. You have to be a little bit more explicit, and if you have to bind things to that element in a different way, and it can sometimes be a pain. There are a lot of keywords, and if I pulled up the documentation on directives, you'd be like, what the heck? Because you have to declare the type of directive, you have to bind the scope, it gets a little, you have to link, you can resolve, lots of crazy keywords, and it gets a little complicated. But essentially what they allow you to do is assign custom attributes. So instead of having like large scale, nodes, so to speak, like HTML5 stuff, maybe you just want to have an attribute that interjects a bunch of images, right? So if you just want to go inside of every div and find an image tag and repeat that over 30 for each one of your images you're loading, you can create a directive element that essentially does that. It will go through and load, it'll go traverse your DOM, find that thing, and it'll just be like it'll be like this, flex-xs. Now that's basically saying that's going to be a flex column. So Google Material Design has essentially decided that flex-xs as a directive, and I could even go and find them in here. Anyways, it is what it is. They've determined that attribute makes this a flex column, and it has these CSS attributes, and it does these things. Same thing with some of these layouts right here, right? Now, if you've ever worked with divs before, you know that CSS just isn't automatic, right? You have to type that. They've done it for you, thrown in an attribute that you can use, and it will do it for you. It also has some, like the animations that you're seeing, those are also linked back to some of the JavaScript, Angular that they've already written for those attributes, for those elements. Real quick, I want to pop off. I bet there'll be one in here. I'm going to show you an example of yeah, there we go. See, that's an example of why you can't always take that for granted. So this exit.js is inside of a lib folder. And some of them will even have a dist, D-I-S-T, which stands for distribution. So that's why you can't always take advantage of that, so to speak. All right, so that's cool. Doesn't look like what we want for that, so I'm going to go ahead and erase it. Where's my index? Nope, it's layout. Here, I'm still all right, let's get in here. Where's login.js? There it is, or HTML. Okay, cool. So we know that that works. We know that you can place this generally anywhere. Actually, let's go ahead and let's do a little Angular real quick. So this is bound to the main controller scope, right? So I can pass things from Angular into the application, right? Or I could go from the application to the controller. And you implicitly declare that. So there's something called two-way data binding and one-way data binding. One way is going from one direction to the other. Two-way is bidirectional. You're going back and forth. Has anybody ever gone and like, and this is the classic example, you're typing in an input and like the name above the input changes to whatever you're typing in. That's an example of two-way data binding, right? And it's also changing in, I should say, it's also changing in the controller. So if you console logged it out, it would actually be manipulating back and forth. So that's used quite often whenever you're like checking if usernames already exist. That's pretty common. So as you're hitting each button, it's sending a request off or caching results to make sure that you're not going to select a username that already exists. You get a big red check mark, right? And a lot of times it won't even let you submit the form. It saves server space that way. You're not submitting a useless request. Like, hey, we're not even going to let you submit the request because the username already exists. Choose something different. Very useful. Everybody uses that. Amazon uses that. Facebook, Google, etc. I'm going to do something different. Let's just do this. Nothing fancy. We're going to do click. Let you guys write that real quick. So I'm just adding this. Think of scope, for those that are in OOP, think of scope kind of like an object. You can attach methods onto that object. So all I'm doing is creating .success, and I'm attaching an anonymous function. And somebody out there in Twitch land is going to be like, not anonymous functions, no. But hey, this is an example, right? So I'm just creating one called success, right? Go back here to login.html. I'm going to go to my button, right? And here comes the super secret sauce of Angular. It does things for you. So Angular has already got an event handler for an attribute called ng-click. Whenever you click a button, it will fire whatever you want. It'll do whatever you want. It'll grab information that you want whenever you put it into here. So if you're doing forms, instead of, you could still use the standard HTML5 form with the post and the method, or you can also use this, create your own function, make it reusable. Super cool. Dynamic forms. Maybe you don't want a post method. Maybe you just want to have a form that fills out a character's name in a video game and have it automatically update on your screen. Maybe you want them to see an update on a screen before it ever goes to the server and they can approve it, right? Those are all cool things you can do with ng-click. And let's see if this works. Eventually, it's going to be like, what? Should get an error eventually. Let's see. Okay, cool. I don't remember which button I applied it to. Which one? One? Okay. So if we go to console, no errors. Success. Look at that. That's cool, right? So how long do you think that would have taken you to write in plain JavaScript? How many lines of JavaScript would that have taken, right? That's not inherently an easy thing to do, right? Somebody's going to be like on click, and they're going to function. It's not as difficult. What if I want to do like, that's a great question. That's a good one. There's so many cool things. I use ngClick all the time. There's even some Angular methods. So for those that do mobile development, you know that like swipe, there's libraries out there that will let you do that with Angular on these things. So like double tap, there's ways to set that up where you can double tap on your phone and they've already got the logic in place and it just does whatever you need to do with no errors. That's a super big thing. Somebody's already solved that problem, right? You don't have to go and reinvent the wheel. Standing on the back of giants. So that's an example of something super easy. What if I put a string in here? Let's, not a string. We'll do a name. We'll do, right? Well, I got to spell my own name right. So now I'm passing this. I'm passing a variable into this. Now we're getting more complicated. We'll go back in here. Right? I'm saying, hey, catch that variable, throw it in the variable name. Sure. Somebody, not Daniel, that's cheating. I just hard code it. Success, no errors. All right. All right, let's go down here. All right. Yes. All right, and I didn't hard code it. For those that weren't keeping up with me flipping screens, I didn't hard code it, I promise. I'm actually passing information around. All right. Let's see if I can do this right the first time. I don't use ng models terribly often. Let's set something up here. Let's do, right? So now I'm setting up, I'm attaching another variable essentially called .name. It's only available in this scope, right? And I'm assigning it blank. Nothing super fancy yet. So let's go to my, what am I doing? There we go. Okay. Cool. So name, remember that. We're fixing to use this. Cool. Let's go in here. I don't like that. About to see some super secret sauce if I do this right. I'm waiting for the people from OK Coders to be like, we saw that example. That's not going to work. All right. So these brackets are pretty important. So remember I keep using this word interpolation, right? Well, this is one of the things that Angular uses to interpolate values, and the actual use of the word in this case is interpolation. I used it previously in another way. Anyways, yeah, so it's looking for these brackets. It's going to interject this. It's like a JavaScript variable, and it's going to go find the variable name in my controller, and it's going to put it where I have these brackets. Unless I broke it, we'll see. Anybody familiar with imposter syndrome? Everybody has it. Yeah. Cool. Let's pop it in here real quick. Oh, didn't work. I don't know. I don't even know if that compiled correctly. Let's save all this real quick. There we go. Now let's try it. Nope. All right, so let's debug. Maybe I should ng model. Right? That should work. Eventually someone's gonna be like, no. Okay. For shame. My first error. I can't get it to work. All right, let's Google it. Let's see. Let's see. Let's do that. Awesome. Looks good. That looks correct. Maybe I got a syntax error. Let's see. Oh, it's because I don't have anything here. Yeah, it would kind of help if I did something like this, right? Because I was rendering something that was blank, and I was getting a blank result. And if this works, I'll be mad. Maybe not mad. Maybe I'll just be a little depressed. Well, it would help if I didn't render an empty string, right? Hey, it works. All right, so I was kind of alluding to another example. I'll go ahead. So this is an example of that one-way directional flow. So I'm taking information from my controller and I'm putting it into my template, right? That's one way. As of right now, it won't go back the other way. And that's where the keyword I was using to try to solve that issue, no comment, right here, ng model. All right, ng model is where we get that back and forth action if you want to have two-way data binding, which is super cool too, right? All right, so ng model, we have to put this on an input. Let's just create an input, right? Yeah, text looks good, sounds good. Yeah, let's put a little style on it real quick so I don't have to. Let's do width, 100 pixels. Height should be automatic. There we go. Sure, looks good. All right, erase this one. All right, this is gonna look horrible, but it should work. Oh, that's cool. So it registered that my model is already set, and it's currently set to Daniel, right? There we go. Cool stuff. Back and forth, two-way, right? And this is where, let's see, James Michael, 1, 2, 3, works for strings, even full text, cool stuff. Two-way data binding is one of those kind of iffy topics, or iffy scenarios. When to use it correctly, it can be overused. You don't always want to take things like, let's say, passwords, or it can be kind of, let's say, when you can use one-way binding, you should probably use it. That should be the default, right? If you can get away with using just one direction, that's probably what you should do, right? If you're having to use two-way data binding, you probably need to second guess yourself a little bit. But there's nothing wrong with it, as long as it's appropriate. The whole password thing, I hope nobody does that. You don't have to display this, right? I could remove this, and you would never see. It would just not show up. You would never know that I'm grabbing that somewhere else and doing something else with it. I'm doing a post request to a text file off in La La Land, right? That's literally how. Whenever you're first starting, you look up the Angular docs and you're getting started with Angular, you're like, this is going to be hard. This is not going to be easy. I'm going to have to learn a bunch of stuff. It is literally that easy. They do all the hard stuff for you. If you had to write this in vanilla JavaScript, you would be hard-pressed to do it. It would not be an easy task. You could do it. Hey, maybe you could do it better, in which case, give me a call. I want to know. Teach me, Obi-Wan. But it does a lot of the hard stuff for you and keeps you from making errors. They've already kind of solved that problem. And Angular 2 goes one step further and solves another problem. So anybody confused about one-way binding or two-way binding? I'm about to do something even cooler. No? All right. Let's do something even cooler. I want to take what's in that box when I click the button and put it into my function. Cool stuff. I want to grab that. Let's grab it. All right, let's take a guess what I'm going to put here. Any guesses? Sorry, Twitchland. I've modeled the data to the variable name. Ah, thank you, Kimberly. Let's give it a try. First, let's test the base case. Let's just be like, okay, still works. Cool. Form problem solved. There you go. Right? Who loves working with forms? We have like action, equals this, method equals post. Anybody love doing that stuff? No, me either. I write lots of div forms. I'm super lazy like that. All right. Two-way data binding, grabbing variables with model, right? We can do all kinds of crazy stuff. Now you just open up the world of an application. You could go off and build some weird application right now. You build a table that inputs data. Now you can copy information without ever saving it. Lots and lots of stuff. Let's do ng repeat. We got about 11 minutes. ng repeat is super awesome if you do it right. Let's change this to all right. I don't want any inputs. Okay, cool. That looks good. And it's going to say large card media. Let's do I am repeating. Right. Actually, I'll do a more classic example. Not plural. And ng repeat. Uh-oh. Now we're getting to some weird syntax. That looks a little different. Now if I go into my controller, it'll look a little better. Use an object. Sure, and I'm not even capitalizing correctly at the moment. That's a NyQuil hazy I am. Cool. All right. ng repeat is really cool. Essentially what it is, this is a for loop, but it's a for loop in the DOM. Awesome stuff, right? Instead of doing like, if you're familiar with jQuery, like caching a piece of HTML, and then on a click handler or on an event, just keep rendering that same jQuery function over and over and over again. We can use super awesome sugary syntax from Angular, right? So what Angular does is it's going to repeat over this array for every value. Now we got to go and we got to take a look at that again, because over here we renamed this part, right? So in names makes sense. I have an array named names. In names there's stuff. This part is a little icky, like it isn't inherently obvious what that is. So whenever it iterates over 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 on the index of the array, it needs to know like what that thing is. So you have to like name it, right? So if you do a function or like a for each, let 0 or let I equal 0, blah, 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 it needs to know that. How does it know that? Well, you have to tell it. Now, I inherently name things related to the type of array I have. So if I have an array of names, plural, I'm going to make a singular name as the quote-unquote variable that will store that. So this is the part you put in ng repeat. Now, it doesn't repeat the outside tag. So where ng repeat is in the DOM, whatever div, wherever it's located, it doesn't repeat that. It repeats literally everything on the inside of that tag on each iteration. Right, so even if I have like image here or something else, it will repeat that over and over and over again. You get unintended consequences like that, so you need to make sure that's like a big one. Play with ng repeat, by the way. It's super awesome. Let's see it work. It's going to probably break that card, but we'll see if it flexes. All right, look at all these. Looks horrible, but it repeats. It did the thing. Do that in vanilla JavaScript, right? Angular is so great. Makes so many awesome decisions for me. Saves me a lot of code. That was like, let's see. I've got 1 line, 2 lines, 3 lines. 3 lines of code, and it does awesome sauce. That is amazing. Like 5 years ago, that job would suck. You'd have lots of jQuery, lots of vanilla JavaScript in that. It would suck, not be fun. Now, easy breezy, good to go, right? I can bind input to the array, and Angular will update the DOM whenever I make manipulations to that. Now we're getting into some weird stuff. I don't know if we're gonna have time for that today. We might do that next time. But let's say you just want to make a to-do list, like a to-do application, the classic example of adding things to a list and displaying it dynamically. Angular can do that off the bat in like 5 lines of code every time. It's awesome. All right, and we would do essentially the same thing. I'm going to see if I can do it real quick. Let's see. I've got 6 minutes or so before I lose your patience. I'm kidding. Let's see. Okay. This is like a weird hackathon thing. Let's go back in here. Right. Success, take name. Let's rename this to add name. That looks good. What else do we need? Name. That looks good. That looks good. We need an input. That's what we need. So let's change that to an input again. Right. Name. All right. That looks good. Looks good. Add name. All right. So I got to rename some things. Let's pop back over here. Let's call this add name, right? And I don't want this anymore. I don't want to cheat. But I need to initialize it to a value, right? So I'm just going to make it blank. I'm just going to initialize it to a blank array. All right, sanity check. I got name there, have my add name function, have my model, have my controller, names is initialized, empty array, add name. Look, I didn't actually put any logic inside of my, see, you guys would have let me run that, and I would have got an error. Everybody on Twitch universe would have laughed at me. God. All right. Everybody familiar with push? Just push it in there. All right. Let's see if this works. All right, we should play a game with this. Raise your hand if you think it'll work. All right, he thinks it'll. Man, these guys have a lot of faith in me. That faith is misplaced. I'm kidding. All right. All right, here we go. Got it. All right, what if does it erase? No. Boom. That looks horrible. That is not the greatest design. Who would use that form? Nobody. One more time. Oh, no inner? Okay. There we go. Sweet. To-do app, done. Worst to-do app in the world. In this case, it's just a name, like a name store. Just oof. Same thing with removing names. That's fun. We might do that next time. So who's convinced Angular is great? Anybody convinced that Angular is awesome? Who wants to do this in PHP? Right. We use lamp stack. We'll write a to-do app. Oh, this guy, he's really good at PHP, though. Yes, sir.
Does it also have library underlying input?
One more time for me.
Underneath the input, have library underlying as well.
That is a great question. So it does. There is. So I got one for you. So what if you want to know every letter when someone just puts anything into an input without submitting it, right? So Angular does have something that sits underneath that. It's called ng-change. And what that does is if that DOM element changes, do this thing, right? So in this case, this is gonna look crazy, but we'll give it a shot. Instead of ng model name, or actually we'll do, yeah, let's do this. ng change equals, oh yeah, this is gonna get weird. Oh, that's not where that goes, that's where that goes. All right, ng change now instead. I'm a little scared. Make sure I don't have any syntactical errors, no syntactical errors. All right, looks good. What was that? This one? Oh, yeah. Oh, thank you. Hey, I did dose up on NyQuil before. Well, not NyQuil technically, but I did dose up on some Tylenol before I came here. All right, let's give this a shot. This would be cool. It's gonna look so weird. All right. All right, now I got lots of stuff. So it does have some cool little neat things with the input box. Most of the time input is gonna be native though. So like a native thing for input is this type attribute. If you put text there, it looks for text. If you put password, it'll just put the dots so you can't visibly see the password. If you put email here, it won't let a form submit unless it has the @ sign in it. It doesn't check the extension, so don't get in that habit. That's bad. That's not, people talk about sanitization of data, like checking data. That's not a valid way, that's not valid sanitization. Like it's good practice to use those, but that's not the end of your sanitation. But those are standard HTML5. Like the actual browser has its own API. It's called HTML5 API. And those are attributes that are associated with that. But Angular has ng-change. You wouldn't use like ng-repeat for that. ng-change is the one I use the most. And then just the mocking the data. So that's really it. So like if you have an edit button, instead of like you have an paragraph tag and a static HTML, and you have an edit button, you hit the edit button, and the paragraph tag turns into an input tag. Like that Angular can do that. All right, 4:01. I think I've done enough craziness in an hour and 45 minutes or so due to production issues. I hope you guys, we're gonna use Angular. Like I went through like the very basics of Angular for the most part. The next time we come in though, we're gonna get deep and heavy. So go home, play with it. Like create these little to-do apps. They're quick and easy with Angular. You're gonna make mistakes, you're gonna fix them, make your life a lot easier. It is a fantastic tool. Go and use it. The next time you come here, I wanna do some crazy stuff. We're actually integrated with Socket.io. We're going to make a login form. We're gonna do exactly what we did today. We're gonna accept input. We're gonna post it somewhere. We're gonna do some stuff with it. So come prepared next time. I really appreciate you guys for showing up today. And I hope you all learned something, right? For all you guys from OK Coders, you guys are like, that was like 4 weeks ago. No way. Horrible. That's okay. Well, I'm glad that we were able to go over Angular today. And we'll get into some cool stuff. So it'll be good. Who likes Angular? Anybody like Angular? You guys? Okay, he likes Angular. You like? Nobody else? Oh, you just rather write it in vanilla JavaScript. Okay, nobody wants to write. Okay, well then, cool. You like Angular. React guy back here.